Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, and it has been a while since I've actually formally talked to the camera, but I promised in one of my last videos that I would do a review on this lens being the Panasonic Leica 10-25mm constant f1.7. So the main reason why I got this lens is for this reason right here. So I've been actually doing a lot more green screen work and incorporating like visual effects into my videos, and so I really wanted a lens that could go super wide and also fairly tight within one lens. I didn't want to have to switch from lens to lens. I have the Leica, like, what is it, 7.5, so it's like a 15mm, so super wide. Yes, the 10-25, which I'm shooting on right now, isn't as wide, but it still gets very decently wide. But also to have that in one lens and being able to punch in, that was very valuable to me. That's better. So the first key point that we're going to touch on is, of course, the main reason why I got this lens, and that is green screen work. And the second is a bit of a can of worms, and it's the comparison between this lens and the 18-35 Sigma. People have very strong opinions on that. There's always raging wars in the Facebook groups, but I'm gonna add my 2 cents and explain why this lens was so valuable to me. I have the Sigma 18-35 and Speed Booster combo, and I love it, but there is a reason why I bought this lens. The third key point is, of course, going to be bokeh production out of this lens. Now, Panasonic does claim that this lens is going to give you great bokeh, and I will agree that it does, and so we're going to definitely touch on that. The fourth point is going to be manual and auto control with this lens. And I will say that both in the auto settings and in the manual settings, I've been very impressed with the capabilities of this lens. And the fifth and last key point is the longevity of this lens. Now, you've seen a lot of like Blackmagic and Panasonic. They've kind of transitioned from micro four thirds to full frame. And a lot of people are asking, well, are they abandoning their micro four thirds community? And I don't think so. We know that there's a GH6 on the way. But really, how well is this lens going to hold up over time? So with all that being said, let's get started. So point number one, the main reason why I got this lens was for green screen work. So I mentioned before that I've been doing a lot more of this type of work, and I was mostly at first just using the really cheap 25 f1.7 lens. You know, I think that's one of Panasonic's most popular lenses, but for the price, it is pretty dang good. Unfortunately, whenever I needed to get more of a wide shot of green screen stuff, I had to switch lenses, and you know, time is money, and especially when you have other people around and you're working with other people. And a lot of time, that extra minute that it takes to switch lenses and refocus and redial your settings, it does make a huge difference. Not only that, but going to a wider lens from the 25 1.7 to my Leica 7.5, that's actually an f2, so I did have to bump up the ISO. And especially when you're doing green screen work, you do really want that ISO as low as you can get it, just because anytime you're getting weird artifacts or noise in your image, it starts to break down the green screen and you might get these weird little speckles in your image, and obviously you don't want that. So to have a 20mm full frame equivalent and a 50mm equivalent at a constant aperture in one lens, that was a pro that weighed very heavy for me. I'm also happy to say that this lens is extremely sharp. In fact, out of all the micro four thirds lenses I've ever shot with, it is easily the sharpest from the middle to the corners, which is very good because when you're shooting green screen, you want your subject completely in focus. Point number two, and this is probably the part of the review that you have all been waiting for. I feel like I'm opening a can of worms here. And I'll probably get some hate in the comments no matter which side of the fence I'm on, but do it. So when this lens was originally announced, a lot of people were speculating that this would be Panasonic's answer to the Speed Booster plus Sigma 18-35 combo. I was one of those people, but after shooting with this lens and also shooting with a Speed Booster Sigma combo, I kind of found that they actually are pretty different lenses. Now, the main thing that would put people off from purchasing this lens is definitely the price. You will have to sell your arm and leg to purchase this lens. It's not cheap. I pre-ordered it when it was announced, and I think I paid like just under 1,800 US for it. So it's definitely not cheap. And when you're comparing it to the Sigma, depending what speed booster you have. Now, I have the Viltrox EF-M2, which is a very cheap alternative to the Metabones speed booster. So for the lens and the speed booster that I bought, I think I paid at the time maybe $1,000, $900, $1,000. So at least $800 cheaper than this lens. Take these two cameras, for example. They are very comparable options in terms of video specs. Both have their pros and cons. However, the Canon 1DX Mark II weighs at least double to that of the GH5S. So many people look at this comparison and they think it's a no-brainer. I mean, the GH5S does many things that the 1DX Mark II does not. And one of those is doing internal time-lapse and internal 10-bit 422. Whereas the 1DX Mark II, you need an adapter to shoot internal time-lapse, and it will only shoot at up to 8-bit. So why are people spending more than double for the Canon 1DX Mark II? Well, mostly for two reasons. One, it is full frame, and two, it has amazing autofocus. So just two different superior features as opposed to the GH5S. However, those two features weigh heavier for some people, and that's why they can justify spending more than double the price. So the price in of itself will be the determining factor for many people, whether they're gonna buy this lens or not. Now, I know what you guys are probably thinking, well, if low light is so important in green screen work, obviously the low light on the Sigma and speed booster combo is gonna be better, and that is true. However, going back to which pros weigh heavier, for me, having that extra wide focal length was more important. So on the speed booster Sigma combination, and taking into consideration that the speed booster is a 0.71 focal reducer, I don't know the exact focal length of that, but I'll put that up here. So on the Panasonic, you are getting a wider focal length, and I believe a tighter focal length as well. And so to me, the pro, I mean, I obviously light my green screen, so that extra low light is not a big deal to me. So hopefully you guys are able to see why the pros of this lens in terms of focal length weigh heavier for me than the low light capabilities of the Sigma speed booster combo. I'm not trying to pit these two together for sake of argument, but just to help you guys understand why I was willing to pay a premium for just a few different features on the Panasonic lens as opposed to the Sigma 18-35. So is that fair? Further into comparison of these two lenses, so know there are different focal reducers when it comes to speed boosters, and you will not want to get anything faster than 0.71. Because in terms of the Metabones speed boosters, they have two versions. There's the Metabones that's 0.71, which is probably the most popular, and then they have, I think it's like the Ultra or Mega or something, but I believe that is 0.64. And you will get some very heavy vignetting if you go with the faster speed booster. And I bring this up because even on the 0.71 speed booster, when I was shooting with that lens and the Sigma, when I was fully wide on the Sigma, I was getting a very subtle vignetting, and I guess you could fix this in post, but again, time is money, and I didn't want to have to deal with that. So not only is the Panasonic lens wider than the Sigma, it's completely consistent throughout the entire frame. On the Sigma at the widest, you are getting some vignetting. So I hope I didn't offend anybody. I do acknowledge that this is all my opinion and what suits my needs, and I know that everybody has different needs. So moving on to key point number 3, Bokeh Production. Now obviously, and going back to the Sigma, the faster your aperture is going to be, obviously you're going to produce more bokeh. However, in comparing these two, I mean, obviously there's no question that the Sigma produces more bokeh, but I really haven't had an issue with not getting enough bokeh. And I really feel like it more so comes to, if you understand focal lengths and you understand the distance of your lens to your subject, I think that you can easily make it work. So again, if bokeh is super important to you and you want as much of that as possible, then absolutely the Sigma lens is definitely the better option. But if you want to stay native and have native communication and you want a little bit wider and you want a little bit tighter, obviously this lens is going to be the better buy. All right, moving on to number 4 is the manual and autofocus settings. Now, I will say I have been extremely impressed with the autofocus on this lens. So I bought the GH5 right when it was released, and that was my first like prosumer mirrorless camera that I ever bought to start my videography business, and I avoided the autofocus like the plague. And as many of you guys probably know, the autofocus is not very great on the Panasonic cameras. It might suit and be okay for some people's needs, but you have to understand that I shoot with the 1DX Mark II a lot, and the autofocus is just not comparable. I'm sorry if that offends people, but that is just the truth. However, for some reason, I don't know, it might be better technology within this new lens, the autofocus is actually pretty snappy. And I'll show some examples right now. I mean, of course, there is a little bit of hunting, but I was really impressed with this lens. Now, will I use the autofocus for the work that I do? No. But for those of you who are considering this lens and you do use autofocus, it might be a decent option, especially when you're holding the camera in front of you and you can be wide at 20mm. I think that's pretty valuable. Now, this lens has really 2 modes. So when I'm out shooting like weddings and stuff, it's very run and gun. You can actually program the lens so you have full control from your actual camera body. And this is simply by clicking or declicking the focus ring right by your focus wheel. If you pull the focus ring back, you're going to have full manual control from the lens. And if you push it forward, you're gonna have full control from your camera body. Now, when I'm doing run and gun, I prefer to have full control from my camera body because, you know, I have my camera on a glide cam and, you know, I'm kind of punching in the stuff on the LCD screen or turning the wheels on the camera. But when I'm doing stuff like this in studio, I'd prefer to have it more manually controlled from the lens, which in the industry people would say is more professional, but whatever. Now, a lot of people were hoping that this lens would have hard stops. Now, they're kind of have hard stops, and a lot of lenses incorporate this technology. When you're focusing and you move it all the way to the left or the right, you definitely feel a stop, but the ring itself will keep on going. Now, moving on to the aperture part of this lens. Again, the same things apply to my focusing. When I'm running gunning, I like to have full control for my camera body. So to do this, you just turn the aperture ring all the way to the A. And if you want to have control from the lens, you just click it out of place and that will show you all of your aperture options. Again, I think this is such a great lens because of these options that this lens gives you. This lens is perfect for run and gun filmmakers, but also if you consider yourself to be a more serious filmmaker and you want to use full manual control from the lens, you have both options. And moving on to number 5, the longevity of this lens. Well, the thing that I was a little confused on when Panasonic announced this is they did say that this would be the first lens of its kind, being a 20 to 50mm full frame equivalent at a constant 1.7. However, I didn't really buy that just because, you know, of course the Sigma is an 18 to 35 constant 1.8. You have Canon's new line of professional lenses and they have their 28 to 70 constant f2, and that's on full frame, so that's going to be brighter traditionally than micro four thirds. And also the declicking on the focus rings, I mean, that's something that Olympus has already been doing and some other Panasonic lenses. So other brands are already incorporating it. So in terms of longevity, I don't see how this lens will be anything special in a couple of years from now. In fact, I think every camera brand will have a lens option just like this one. So when Panasonic and Leica announced their collaboration for this lens, they weren't competing with Sigma or any of these other brands. They were competing with themselves. And there are a lot of die-hard micro four thirds users out there that will have what we call brand loyalty. They're more so answering a question that was a void within their own lens choice. So again, this was just my honest review, and I hope that makes sense as to why I purchased this lens and was willing to pay a premium over some comparable options. Again, there's just pros and cons to every lens and every camera body, and you more so just have to think what pros weigh heavier for you. So thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. Let me know you're here, and we will catch you guys next time.